Okay, we are recording. So welcome everybody to our session today. It's called Diverse Literacy Strategies for Diverse Learners, Common Sense Literacy Strategies for All Content Areas. And I'm Chris Street. I'm a professor at Cal State Fullerton.
And I am Christy Kenny Kitchen. I'm a teacher at Buena Park High School. So what you will leave with today, we will give you 3 literacy strategies for before, during, and after reading, and a literacy strategies guide with many additional strategies to use in your classroom as early as tomorrow. Chris, you want to take this one?
Sure. So if we think about literacy and why it matters, just look at that graphic on the right. Just scan it for some of the stats there. And I think all of this really boils down to literacy is much broader than we might have thought about it in the past. It's not just reading and writing, but it's also about being able to think critically and to be able to listen well and speak well. So literacy broadly defined is something that all of us should be concerned about. And we do have lots of people in our country who still struggle with literacy. So being able to give to our students literacy strategies that will help them acquire the reading, the writing, the critical thinking, the speaking, and the listening skills they need is really essential. And that's why we're here today.
So you might want to take out your phones and take a quick picture of this. We'd like you to reflect on a couple of questions. What are some ways you currently structure reading in your class? And what have you found successful, or what do you struggle with? So take a moment, either write that down, use it as a journal topic, think about what you do in your class. We're going to go ahead and move on now. Feel free to pause the video if you would like to do this prior to moving to the next slide. So now, go ahead, Chris.
So we're going to focus on 3 different strategies, all ways to help kids think critically. And these are appropriate for any content area and really just about any grade level. I'd say grade 4 through 12, certainly. So very, very broadly applicable strategies.
Yeah, good point, Chris. So the strategies are anticipation guide for before a reading, think aloud's cognitive strategies for during, and gist for after a reading.
Okay, so it's important that we as teachers prime our students before we ask them to read, because one of the largest determinants of how effectively students read is how well we can connect what they're reading to their prior knowledge. So we're constantly trying to connect to students' prior knowledge, or if they don't have much prior knowledge, build prior knowledge before we ask them to read. And an anticipation guide is a great strategy for doing that. So the way it works, if you haven't seen one before, is you as the teacher would create a list of statements related to universal themes or dilemmas or issues related to the text you want them to read. And then the kids place a rating next to each statement to indicate their level of agreement with each statement. And what this does is, prior to having kids read, you get to know their familiarity with the topic or the idea. And it's a motivation for them to read purposefully by activating prior knowledge. So it sets them up for success before the reading event actually even starts. And here's what one looks like. It's a bit blurry, but you can see generally how one might look. This one's for Brave New World. So there are a series of statements, and students are asked to put a plus if they agree with the statement, a minus if they disagree, or a question if they're unsure.
So then that brings us to the strategies that you might use during a reading, in the middle of a reading. And so we have something called a Think Aloud, also called Think Aloud protocol, and these are cognitive strategies. So for this, teachers would read a text aloud and verbalize their thinking with the class. And this helps students understand what good readers do. So an example of what teachers might do while reading You might reread sentences. You might actively look for context clues, try to make sense of what you read. And this really works quite well when you are asking students to get through a difficult text or something that they've never seen before. And I'm going to do an example of this one for you. So this would be a paragraph, and I'm going to put myself into the students. I would approach this as if I were a student. So this is a paragraph that might be quite difficult for students, depending on their level, of course. Here it is. I'm going to stop every once in a while, and this is exactly what I would do in class. It's sometimes difficult to overlook the unsavory and undeserved reputation that the term rhetoric has. Okay, what? Unsavory. Unsavory to me, I've only heard that with food. It's difficult, unsavory. So unsavory, if food's unsavory, it means it's not good. So overlook the not good, the not so good reputation the term rhetoric has. Okay, what does rhetoric mean? I'm going to circle that. I'm going to come back to that. Many people are most familiar with the word only in its negative sense, describing something that has style but no substance. Okay, that seems to be an explanation of rhetoric. Okay, let's read on. His speech was mere rhetoric. Or even worse, rhetoric sometimes characterizes a speaker's lack of sincerity or deliberate falseness in order to coerce an audience. In this ill-considered definition, means to hoodwink the audience, to get them to believe that what is false is actually true, and to manipulate facts or emotions to serve the speaker's unscrupulous ends. That was a long sentence. Okay, I'm gonna have to break that down. Let's see here. Rhetoric sometimes characterizes, and as I go, what I would be doing is saying these exact words. I would be sharing with students how my brain is working as I'm reading this difficult text. In doing this, I'm showing students that, first of all, I'm a human being. I don't always understand what I'm reading, even though I have a degree in this very subject. And sometimes I encounter difficult words. So if they encounter difficult words, they're in good company. And it lowers their affective filter so that they can then accept the difficult text and the task of breaking it down.
All right, great. So thank you, Christy. So we've taken you through an activity to get kids ready to read. Christy demonstrated the kind of thinking that you might show students that you're doing while you're reading during the reading event. And now we've got one for summary. So after the reading event, what can you do to help kids synthesize what they've learned? So GIST is a way to get kids to summarize reading into a very succinct statement. It requires for kids to look for the main idea or the gist of the text. And the technique is most appropriate with limited amounts of text. So maybe a section of a text, a couple of paragraphs, or a short article. That's what works best. So let's see on the next slide how this works. So as a teacher, this is what you would be doing. You would provide a prompt and a set number of words as a limit for writing. So the prompt might ask for a summary of the text or might require the students to focus on a single aspect of the text. The key is the kids must answer the prompt within the word limit. So the next slide, I think, will show us one and you'll have a better sense of how this works. So here's an example. Describe the reason Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence in 20 words or less. So that's your task. You've only got 20 words to summarize the response for that prompt. And here's an example. King George was a tyrant who imposed British rule on colonists who wanted to establish their own government, 18 words. So it forces kids to really, really think carefully about what was the most essential information from that reading. What was the gist all about? Kind of a, go ahead.
Chris, I was going to jump in to say that when I assign gist, because teenagers have a tendency to see, 20 words or less, I can do it in 5. You know, they want to cut every corner. I'll say you have to write a gist in 19 to 21 words exactly, and they have to count the words and write the number at the end. which keeps me from having to count the words.
Good idea. And good reminder that kids will take a shortcut when given a choice. So I like that suggestion. That probably would help the quality of the gist as well. And so here's one bonus feature with the gist. It allows the instructor to quickly check on comprehension without requiring much time for grading. So this is a really nice formative assessment. You could very easily, as the class period's ending, have kids do a gist on their way out. That's their ticket out the door. They give it to you. And as they're leaving, you can quickly scan them and just see, did these gists represent the most essential information from the reading? And then when the kids come back the next day, if there's some reteaching to be done, you now know what has to be retaught. But if they really seem to get it pretty well, then you move on. So it's a nice, quick, formative assessment tool.
And so we've put together a literacy strategies guide that has these strategies, and actually it has 38 pages of strategies, of literacy strategies to use in virtually every subject area. And if you'd like to have that literacy guide for yourself, please send me an email. There's my email address. It's ckenny@fjuhsd.org. And I'll send you a link to the doc. Send me any questions and I will help you out.
So we just wanted to pause for a minute and ask you just to take a quick picture of this slide and reflect on this, or come back to it later. But again, the idea of looking at what literacy looks like in your discipline, in your subject area, in your classroom, and what have you struggled with in your classes to help kids access that text. So what we shared with you today, without really talking about it, was something called a structured reading lesson, where you always design your reading instruction with a pre-reading activity or two to get kids ready, to establish a sense of purpose and direction, excitement, motivation. Then we do something during the reading event to help kids process what they're learning. And then finally, we ask them to do something after to reflect on what they've learned. So something before, during, and after is really, really helpful for kids to improve their comprehension.
And then we have the question for you to consider: what have you struggled with in your classes as you help students access your text? You know, the Common Core standards ask that all teachers in all subject areas focus on helping students develop literacy in their discipline. So what have you struggled with in this? Go ahead and take a picture of this. Maybe use it as a journal prompt. Think about your work as a teacher. And we'll go ahead and move on.
Okay, so we both want to thank you for joining us today. Hope you got something useful out of this. Reminder just to email Christy if you'd like the literacy guide, and we hope to see you again in the future.
Have a great day, everyone.